After media reports that President Trump repeatedly floated the idea of the U.S. withdrawing from NATO, I'll be asking if such threats have any credence, and if so, what would be the global impact of such a decision? And after 200 million people in India staged the largest strike in history, what is it they want? Is Modi likely to become India's Deng Xiaoping or Gerhard Schröder? Welcome to The Point, an opinion show coming to you from Beijing. I'm Li Xin. According to a report in the New York Times published on Monday, the possibility of a U.S. withdrawal from the NATO alliance was repeatedly floated by President Donald Trump behind closed doors last year. Senior administration officials told the paper that Trump said several times over the course of 2018 that he wanted to pull out of the alliance, at one point telling his aides that he didn't see the point of the organization. He has repeatedly made his disdain of NATO amply clear, calling the alliance obsolete, accusing other members of owing the U.S. money, and even coming close last summer to threatening to withdraw from the group if other members didn't increase their spending on defense. Meanwhile, his relationship with Russia has come under renewed scrutiny after a Washington Post story reported this week that Trump deliberately concealed details of his meeting in Helsinki last year with Russian President Vladimir Putin. The New York Times has also reported that the FBI launched an investigation into Trump's administration over whether he was secretly working on behalf of the Russians. Does Trump have a point in questioning the raison d'etre of the organization? How right are NATO members to be worried? Joining me for the discussion are Qinduo, a senior fellow at the Pangoal Institution, and current affairs commentator Einar Tangen. Gentlemen, welcome to The Point. According to several polls, the American people actually support NATO to quite a large margin, about 80%, or 4 in 5 people. Despite that, why is President Trump so against or so disliking to this organization, Einar?
Well, quite frankly, he doesn't like any multilateral organization, period. I mean, you can't pay. He pulled out of TPP, Paris Climate Accord, anything that involves everybody else he doesn't like. He really sees his worldview is that the United States should be at the center of the world and that there should be bilateral agreements with everybody where the U.S. can use the superior economic, political, and military positioning to extract the best deal. He thinks like a developer. You use everything at your disposal to get the best deal.
But isn't he worried about the support that he gets? I mean, given the kind of public opinion, is he not worried that his position on NATO might not be supported by the voters?
I mean, the adults have left the room. The people who used to talk him down from this NATO thing were all the generals who said, look, you can't do this, don't even think about this. Forget the popularity. We have strategic interests. We have alliances. And these are things that cannot be ignored. He looked at it as a dollar and cents game. Well, we're putting lots in and they're not, and if we're going to stay in, they have to buy a lot more things from us. But all those people are gone. He's now surrounded by people who are very much along his line.
Indeed. For instance, former Secretary of Defense James Mattis, he was a supporter of the NATO alliance, and now he has been asked to leave his job, let's say, earlier than he expected. So, Qinduo, without Mattis in place, do you think that the United States is really serious, or President Trump is really seriously considering withdrawing NATO?
Well, probably not to that degree. I mean, his dislike of NATO is very visible and obvious. As you mentioned in the beginning of the show, like on several occasions. I think he has a point. If you follow his thinking, first of all, like the U.S. takes care of 75% of the expenditure of NATO. That's a heavy burden for the U.S. from his point of view, because America first, to a large degree, means economic terms. It's about the commercial terms, about the money. And also, if you look at the purpose of NATO, that's to fight against the Warsaw group led by former Soviet Union. Soviet Union
which
is gone.
already collapsed
Right.
decades ago. So
many
who
people-
is NATO having in mind as imaginary enemy at this moment?
But it must be Russia right now, like in European continent.
Yes,
Yeah,
yes,
Einar?
it's definitely Russia. They're gearing up, but you're absolutely right. NATO is an institution in search of a mission, and unfortunately, that's not necessarily good. But the reason that no one is spending a lot on it is they say, who are we fighting? Okay, there's a nuclear deterrent involved. One of the things that's really worried the Europeans is the withdrawal from the short and medium nuclear missile treaty that the U.S. had with Russia. Now they're pulling out of it. Now he's threatening to pull out NATO. You don't know if this is just a tactic by Donald Trump in order to get them to buy more arms from the U.S., using it as leverage, much the way he does with China, by sailing ships through the Taiwan Straits or through Shisha Islands.
I think a fundamental question has to be asked here. As we said, NATO was founded to balance or to contain the other camp led by Russia. Now that that camp has collapsed decades ago, is there really a point for NATO to exist? I mean, what are they trying to defend themselves against? If this organization does not exist anymore, is Russia going to just blaringly invade Western Europe?
Well, if you talk to somebody in Poland, they would say yes. They're going the opposite way.
That's the perception of Poland, but what is really the intention of Russia? Qinduo?
Yeah, I think, you know, if you look at what Russia has done in Crimea and the relationship with the Ukraine, and of course the relationship with tension with some Eastern European countries, many in the West tend to blame Russia for the tension between, say, Russia and the Ukraine. But look, after the collapse of Soviet Union, there's eastward expansion of European Union, eastward expansion of NATO, at the expense of the Russian influence. For example, like if you talk about the sphere of influence, like Ukraine, people generally, traditionally see that as part of Russia's influence. But now it's taken away basically by the Western countries. So Russia feels this is a strong sense of insecurity. They have to respond. They have to react in a way to protect their interests.
I completely agree with you. It's worse than that. There were people who assured the Russians on the floor of the Duma that there would be no eastward expansion of NATO and no eastward expansion of the EU. And that was violated. And if you go back, I think it was 2005, Putin gave a speech at the Munich Security Conference, and there he laid out, in a 28-minute speech, he said, "You have lied and humiliated my country. All right, we are now no longer dedicated to the preservation of a world order that can do this to us."
So if there is a threat against the Western Europe, it's a threat that they inflicted on themselves by not fulfilling their promise.
Okay, let's flash forward. The problem was, who has the right to tell, do you have the right to make a decision for Poland? No. The U.S. made promises it was not in a position to keep. The U.S. does not rule Poland or Hungary or any of these countries, yet they made a promise that they would not allow any expansion, and the Europeans nodded, and everyone thought everything was very good. Remember, China and Russia are fundamentally different in one regard. Russia is a nation of the largest minority, not majority, and they are very, very territorial. They do not like to have an enemy on the border. They want buffer states around them. And when you violate that, you cause them to feel insecure. And that's why there's no way they're going to give up.
Again, at this moment, NATO was founded on the idea that if one member of NATO is attacked, then there will be a collective defense of the alliance, and that is the famous Article 5. And yet, in the past 70 years, only once was that collective defense triggered, and it was, I guess, for whom? For the United States after the 9/11 terrorist attack. So does that mean that this entire mechanism was actually not very useful at all, if out of the 70 years that it was yeah, or you say it's a deterrent. Qinduo, what's your understanding?
It's more like a pretense, like somehow you feel secured as part of NATO, as a member of NATO, especially for smaller countries. You feel secure. The smaller countries, in particular, say the countries close to Russia, let's say, for history reasons. But the thing is, like, if you look at, say, peaceful coexistence after the collapse of former Soviet Union, without eastward expansion, at the expense of the Russian interests, and then there's no use for the existence of NATO.
And I doubt that it is in Russia's interest to invade these smaller countries and expand its
No,
influence.
Russia is struggling.
I understand that, but why? There's still allegations there that they're in Ukraine now. Crimea, there was no way that Russia would ever give up Crimea, despite it's their only warm water port. And the amount of Russian lives spilled over the centuries securing that, it was just things. The fact that it wound up in Ukraine was completely by arbitrary decision, an after lunch decision after much drinking without even a quorum of the secretariat there. So that was an issue. But this feeling, and there are other areas where in Eastern Europe where there has been some support of separatist movements and things like this. So there is this specter there. So it depends on who you're talking about. Is Russia going to invade France? No, I don't think anyone, or England or Germany or things like that. But there are questions if you're in the Eastern Bloc, whether or not you are indeed secure.
So people are saying even the fact that President Trump is talking about withdrawing, the possibility of withdrawing from NATO is already the gift of the century for Putin. Is it really that bad?
Yes, it is.
It is?
Already today you've heard talk of Russia talking about Belarus and how it should be much more closely allied with Russia. That would be a very interesting development, and there would be massive reaction. I'm saying that right now you have a status quo. It might not be the best one, but creating a vacuum isn't necessarily a good thing either.
Yeah, Qinduo, your take?
But the things like there's a lack of trust, obviously, between Russia and the Western countries,
Absolutely.
the European countries, the United States. That's the fundamental problem here. And if you look at the public or in the public area, the disbelief, the distrust, or even the hatred toward the Russians is unbelievable. So, however, efforts, whatever amount of efforts by President Trump, I would say it's very difficult for him to improve relationship with the Russians. But still, I tend to agree. Probably, that would be seen as a gift to Russia, under the mentality of zero sum. That's our loss, then that's their gain. I
think President Trump is actually interesting in that he's pragmatic. He doesn't see things in an ideological manner. Actually, I have a European politician, a senior politician, complaining to me in an interview that, look, Donald Trump calls President Xi Jinping his good friend, but he never said that to any of his European counterparts, which is really something that they feel very uncomfortable about. For me, or for the Chinese, I don't have a problem with that. Why can't China be afraid?
So you're preaching a China first?
No, I'm not preaching a China
first. I'm saying that,
look,
everything that China has accomplished since over the last 40 years has been in an area of relative calm. And if that is going to continue, you need that. You're a trading nation. You need resources coming to China. I do not know
if without NATO, Europe is going to fall into complete chaos. I'm not so sure about that.
You're not sure about it, but there's questions. And when we've seen vacuums form, have good things come out of vacuums? I don't think so.
No, not necessarily vacuum. Look at the French and also the Germans. They talked about establishing their own forces, their own defense forces. They have the resources economically. European Union is probably the largest economy in the world, and in terms of technology, they are on par with the United States. And as long as there is a will, they can establish their own defense forces or collective defense forces.
We in the U.S. spend more than the next 10 countries combined.
Okay.
We have the technology.
But that's also your problem, remember?
Well, it's really interesting. I have to leave it there. We are going to continue discussing this topic, which is very important for the future of the world order, I believe. Many thanks to Qinduo, a senior fellow at the Pangoal Institution, and current affairs commentator Einar Tangen.